that we find inadequate about the President's plan. I think the President has to join us in making a significantly greater commitment to these 6 areas to stem the rising tide of violence in America. And that's what it is, violence. First, we have to join together to ensure that drug dealers are punished swiftly, surely, and severely. And in line with what the President is calling for, we have to hold every drug user accountable. Because if there were no drug users, there would be no appetite for drugs and there'd be no market for them. Let's take a look at what the real problem.
Yep, that is that young man who's completing sentences without stuttering at all is our current president, Joseph Robinette Biden. That is him in the 1980s, talking about how we have to make sure that we lock up all the drug users and drug dealers, except for his children. Just lock up the black ones. Don't lock up the Bidens, just the black ones. But somebody is actually pushing back and calling out Joe Biden for supporting and not doing what he promised, which is righting the wrongs of Joe Biden's drug war escapades in the 80s and 90s. And that person is none other than the former heavyweight champion of the world in boxing, always my heavyweight champion, Mr. Mike Tyson. Yes, the former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson has urged Joe Biden to follow through on his commitment to correct our country's failed approach to marijuana and give clemency to the thousands of nonviolent cannabis offenders still languishing in federal lockup. Yes, he is. Yes, they are. Now, Mike Tyson told the UK Guardian, President Biden has the power to effect real change. He can right these wrongs and grant clemency to those who are sitting in prison for cannabis offenses. We know the failed war on drugs was wrong, and it was wrong, and no one should be sitting in jail for cannabis. It is time that our country moves forward and ends cannabis prohibition once and for all. Now, it is, I have to state that legal cannabis sales in the United States could be reaching $40 billion annually. And campaigners say that it is an injustice that more than 2,000 people, overwhelmingly people of color, translate black people, are in federal jails sentenced for conduct that is today essentially legal in almost half the country, with recreational cannabis legal in 24 states. About 30,000 more are in state penitentiaries, for nonviolent cannabis offenses, activists say, with data patchy. Biden does not have the power to pardon these offenders, but Tyson pleaded with the president to pressure those states to do so. Now, Biden has been accused of misleading voters in his message over his pardon for people convicted of simple marijuana possession, in line with his campaign promise to decriminalize cannabis. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that Joe Biden, Scranton Joe Biden, lied to the public? I am shocked. Liberal media told me only Donald Trump lies to people. Wow. Man. Whew. Now, in 2022, Joe Biden said, no one should be in jail just for using or possessing marijuana. However, as of 9 months earlier, no offenders sentenced solely for simple possession of marijuana remained in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission. Those who remain in prison face charges including drug trafficking. In a video for Reform, a campaigning cannabis brand founded by Weldon Angelos, who served 13 years in prison for selling less than $1,000 worth of weed. Wow. Before he was granted clemency in 2016. Mike Tyson said it beggared belief that people were doing murderous time for trafficking a mild medicine. The White House will receive the letter penned by Tyson, a cannabis activist and entrepreneur, which says it is high time for the authorities to reconcile with communities, including poor people and people of color, who have paid the heavy cost of the U.S.'s war on drugs. Even for those who sold cannabis and are now free, those criminal records are often a serious impediment to finding work. Now, Tyson said, the war on marijuana is over, Mr. President, as seen in legalization efforts across the country in polls showing that most Americans oppose marijuana prohibition. Tyson wrote in his letter to Joe Biden, through a categorical clemency grant, you can declare an end to federal warfare on our people and mark a new era based on peace and prosperity. Now, Mike Tyson's not the only one who is making noise about this. His letter actually comes after the rappers Drake, Killer Mike, and a lot of other chart-topping artists told Biden in a letter in 2021 that enough is enough. No one should be locked up in federal prison for non-violent marijuana offenses. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency has long maintained that cannabis is among the most addictive and dangerous drugs and has no medical value, despite a growing wealth of evidence to the contrary. A top advisor to Richard Nixon, the president who first placed cannabis into the most restrictive drug scheduling category, previously admitted, "Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." That was John Ehrlichman. He talks about it. The DEA has been reviewing cannabis' status as a Schedule I drug on par with heroin after the Department of Health recommended its rescheduling it to the lowest category. So big props to our friend over at The Guardian for that story. But Mike Tyson, big props for him for bringing up this story. As John Ehrlichman said in the quote there, Richard Nixon declared war on cannabis in the 1960s and 70s for one simple reason. People who smoked marijuana didn't like Richard Nixon. Hippies did not like Richard Nixon. And black people did not like Richard Nixon. It was associated with the counterculture and radicals. And so since it was associated with the counterculture and radicals, Richard Nixon started the war on drugs to give them opportunities to harass hippies and black people. And that's not me saying that. That is Richard Nixon's aide, John Ehrlichman, saying that. So when you see that we have for 50 years ruined people's lives, mostly black people's lives, over a racist and classist drug policy. And even before that, you look at the reason that marijuana itself is illegal is because in the 1930s, we had a drug czar named Harry Anslinger, who again was a racist. And he said he associated marijuana with jazz music. I mean, you guys blame everything on hip hop music. Back then they blamed everything on jazz music. And they said that black men and Hispanic men would give white women marijuana, and that would cause them to run away with them. Yeah. That's why it's illegal, everybody, because ultimately black men and Hispanics would get white women to run away from them. Yes, I agree. The war on drugs is probably the worst thing to happen to black communities since slavery. It has made black men the most incarcerated people on planet Earth. There are more black men incarcerated in the United States of America than there are women incarcerated in the entire world put together. In every country. You take all the incarcerated women in every country all over the world, put them together, it doesn't add up to the amount of black men sitting in American prisons. And a lot of you defend Joe Biden and defend Bill Clinton because You know, you spent your life defending Democrats, and why stop now? But you have to look at the damage that has been done to our communities by the war on drugs. And the crazy thing, the war on drugs didn't even stop the violence. Violence did, like, Richard Nixon started the war on drugs in 1971. Violent crime kept escalating into the early 90s. 93 was the most violent year I believe we had in modern history. The death penalty did not stop violence. Bringing back the death penalty. We brought back the death penalty in 1976. Violent crime didn't start going down until 1993, 1994. At which it's gone down. It's been on a downward trend for the last 30 years ever since that. So mass incarceration has not benefited the black community in any way whatsoever. There's no reason to defend it. And so, like my good man Mike Tyson, all I say is, you gots to legalize it, baby.